Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Julia Bersin, welcome to the conversation today.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
It is a real pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from the Bay Area, San Francisco. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the recent report out from the Josh Bersin Company, People Management in the Age of AI, the Rise of the Supermanager. I love the title, and even more, I love the topic. So interesting. And I think there's a lot to unpack here. Before we get started, I do want to share Julia's bio with everybody. Julia Bersin is currently Associate Director of Research at the Josh Bersin Company, studying people, practices, and technology that helps companies transform work for their future. She has a background in B2B tech with a focus on demand gen and growth, and she has experience managing multiple functions and teams and marketing to various industries and roles, including HR, talent acquisition, customer support, and revenue functions. There's a whole lot more I could share, but I'm going to pause there. Anything you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
No, I think you summed it up well. I am likewise very excited for today's conversation. It's a growing topic. We're talking a lot about AI, and I know that, leadership and management is really your expertise. So excited to also, get your perspective and share more on what we've learned.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, why don't we start off with just a little bit of the background for this report? Why did Josh Bersin Company undertake this research at this point in time? And then we can start to unpack why it's important and all of the different elements of it.
Absolutely. So we've been doing a lot of research on AI since it's become such a hot topic among all organizations. And we really wanted to explore the role of managers in AI transformation. Every company is talking about AI right now. There are substantial investments being made. One of McKinsey's reports from earlier this year said 92% of companies are investing more over the next 3 years in generative AI, and yet very few feel their investments have reached maturity. So there's a lot of investment. Simultaneously, companies are seeing more adoption of AI. They're also seeing more return on their investments and starting to be able to measure that. And what we call the super worker effect is happening, where every employee is starting to have access to these tools and can really exponentially grow their impact, their innovation, and productivity. So we've got these sort of positive excitement about AI. And at the same time, as mentioned, companies are not seeing the full large scale benefits yet. What we're hearing is that, companies are in this experimentation and innovation phase. They haven't quite gotten past that to this meaningful business transformation. And then at the same time, you've got the people opportunities, right? There's all of this coming up around trust from employees, discussions around AI's impact on the workforce, on jobs and roles, as well as a big learning and skilling gap that needs to be filled. So the problem really is not the technology, right? It's the people stuff and the process. And so, the manager sits in the middle of all of this. And the other piece I would say is that a lot of the innovation that's happening with AI is happening at the front lines. And so we really wanted to explore, what is the role of the manager in, not only, driving innovation at the front lines for their team, but really creating business impact of AI at a larger scale. So that's what we really did in this, is we were like, how is the management role changing?
Yeah, so you mentioned the super worker, the super employee, and of course, with these new tools comes increased productivity, but also stress, challenge in collaboration, et cetera. And then how do managers manage and lead within this new environment? It is interesting. I was reading a report, I think it was out of Harvard Business Review the other day, that was focusing on kind of the disjointed nature of AI adoption amongst, as you mentioned, really frontline workers, the ones that are really implementing it and finding gains. But it's very fragmented and it's not coordinated. in many cases in many organizations, and that creates additional challenges. And it also just means that companies aren't fully leveraging their AI investments when it's not strategically coordinated, right? And it's
Absolutely.
happening ad hoc, here and there, and all over the place. And so, yeah, we're in this environment with lots of disruption. Technology is giving us the opportunity to rapidly, increase our output. The question is, do we know how to use it effectively and appropriately to have quality output? And then, how do we get beyond just the AI slop? There's lots of conversation around AI slop to get to really strategic value add in, frontline workers all the way up through the organization. So again, this all comes back to the manager, the leader, this who has to really almost bring out kind of a new skill set themselves around how to manage in this kind of an environment. What are you seeing along those lines in terms of like what this super manager or the effective super manager is looking like? What kind of skills and competencies do they have?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe it'd be helpful for me to kind of define what a super manager is, and we can go into some of their characteristics and priorities. So a super manager really is a human-centered manager that is supercharged by AI. So human-centered leadership characteristics, these have become really important, maintained their importance through, this time of constant transformation, right? We've been talking about leading through change for quite some time now. And those characteristics still matter. Prioritizing trust, arguably, they matter even more now. Growth and development for their teams, empathy, listening, people first approach to management. That all applies. Then we add on AI to that. And so I like to kind of break it into a couple of pieces. So this component and responsibility of managers now for driving that frontline innovation and fostering experimentation on their teams. So creating super worker teams. There's a number of different kind of priorities or skill sets and things to actually drive that component, and we can talk about that. The second piece is managers using and powered by AI themselves now. So as managers, there are all sorts of different manager effectiveness tools. They've got access to AI agents themselves to not only be more productive and lead by example, but become more effective people leaders. And it's been interesting to follow that space too around, HR technology and how many tools there are out there where managers can, have access to a personalized manager coach, AI coach in their pocket. So I think those two components, that's kind of the big shift. And I would say, just to kind of sum that up, what sets super managers apart isn't just how they're using technology, it's really how they lead with it. And we have this in the report, right? Instead of managing people and enabling technology, they're enabling people and managing technology. And I feel like that shift is a really important one to think about. So we can dive into some of the characteristics, but that's kind of how we think about a super manager.
Yeah, I love that definition. And of course, and I'm sure you all have thought about this as you're choosing that label. You think of super anything and you think of superheroes, right? You think of an Iron Man, or you think of, whatever. Choose your superhero of choice. And there's just a capacity extension, right? So someone like a Tony Stark, who's just brilliant and leverages technology to expand what he's capable of doing. So when I think of like those are the types of superheroes that I've always resonated with more than like Thor. Thor's great, great movies, funny, whatever. But he's like a demigod, and so like I can't become that. But at least conceptually, like maybe it's possible I could become a Tony Stark type of, like leverage my intelligence, leverage technology to then increase my capabilities, or a Batman, or take any of those examples. And so I like the label of super manager because you really are looking at ways to extend what you already have. The technology is not going to make up for what you don't have. If
Hmm.
you don't have those human centered skills and competencies, and if you're not that kind of a leader, and then you try to leverage technology to help you in that space more, it's not going to work. But the technology is a really great way to extend uh, those talents that you already do have in your human-centered, leadership approach, to then make even increased impact. So, anyways, I just
Yeah.
like the title. I like kind of how that imagery, works in my mind. And so that's just a comment. But yeah, let's
Yeah.
dig into more of these competencies then. Like, what does it actually look like when you're enabling your people through the technology?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad the visual resonates. And I think, to your point on the human-centered leadership characteristics, those absolutely still mattering. I mean, part of the benefit of AI is it's taking away some of the manager tasks that require a lot of time and manual work and enables managers to focus on those human-centered components and the meaningful conversations. But yeah, let's dive into some of those competencies and some of those characteristics that super managers have. So the first one we talk about is really fostering a culture of AI exploration. So that's creating this environment for teams to be curious. And I know you had a recent, podcast on leading with curiosity, and I think that is something that managers have this really important opportunity to do and to foster that behavior and a mindset among their teams. So what does that actually look like? It's encouraging bringing AI to the table in problem solving, right? AI is maybe not going to always be the solution, but can we start to get into the exercise of asking, can we use AI to help us with this? And that just also, familiarizes people and gets them used to having this in their toolkit. Creating safe spaces for experimentation. We've talked to several organizations that, have AI task forces that are doing things like this, where, they've created workspaces or communities or, Slack channels where people are sharing the experiments that they're running. And they don't always have to be successful, right? These can be things that failed. But the point is, they're creating a space where people can share what they're learning and then encourage that behavior among their team members. Celebrating both AI successes and failures. So, again, that psychological safety component is really important. And then creating some accountability around AI usage and aligning it with performance management. Like Microsoft is an example of this. They've included AI adoption and responsible usage as part of their performance evaluations for both employees and managers. And so companies are starting to do this, and that also kind of reinforces the behavior of using AI. So that's one of the examples. Another
If we
thing,
can
oh yeah.
double click on that for just a minute, I really like the accountability piece. You weave that in and integrate that into the employee experience and the manager supervisory experience, so that it really becomes an expectation and it becomes a supported activity of what your people are doing. So that they can learn and grow and to leverage this. It also, it's partially the psychological safety piece, but it's also just the broader kind of permission structure for people to engage, because there's still, it depends on the culture of the company, but like there's still many managers, many organizations, many managers, many people who are really cautious around usage, or they hear, the term AI slop, and so they're worried that if they do anything with the aid of AI, that it won't be perceived as quality or it won't be perceived as useful, and they'll be actually, deemed, they'll actually be looked down on, for what they produce, irregardless of what the actual quality ends up actually being or how valuable it could be. There's a lot to unpack there in terms of like what the experience is, even gendered experience, because I think there's some research out there that shows that women disproportionately are getting kind of negative impacts of that AI usage perception.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that maybe a little bit more, like how, as we're working to embed this and integrate this into the expectations, how we effectively remove the nervousness around the usage, and encourage folks to do it in a way, that, to your point, like we're experimenting. Like this is new for everybody.
Yeah.
And so we're all experimenting. We're expected to experiment, to fall forward, fail fast, iterate rapidly, and share what we're doing. And hopefully that doesn't happen in a way where, say, women are disproportionately negatively impacted because they do something that doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on a couple of important components. Yeah, one being, having permission to spend time experimenting, right? And when we go back to kind of performance evaluations, encompassing some usage of AI. If an employee is only gold on, getting things done, and there's going to be a curve, there's going to be a period of time when the AI maybe is not going to make them faster, then they're not going to be incentivized to use it. So really ensuring that employees have the space to experiment and are not going to be, negatively impacted by spending time on that. In terms of creating that kind of safe space for experimentation too, I mean, transparency is a huge element here. And one of the things you touched on too is like being reprimanded for experiments failing and people feeling like they can't share that they're experimenting with it. How can leaders actually showcase experiments that they've done? Even putting that up on a town hall at an organization, highlighting when somebody does something in a team meeting using AI, like really modeling that behavior and also sharing openly when things don't work. And celebrating that. And, recognition is an important component here too. If you can recognize employees, not just when they build something amazing with AI, but when they tried something and maybe it didn't work, that's important. And the transparency element comes back to when we think about, this question of if I'm using AI, am I cheating? And that's something that, organizations can really set standards around and teams can set standards around. It's like, hey, you can use AI to do this. We welcome it. We encourage it. There's a human in the loop element, right? Like we need you to be checking your work. We need you to be looking over things. We need you to be, doing the final polish at the end of this, but we expect you to use AI. So that requires clarity from leadership and from managers.
Yeah, the AI is cheating piece. That is one that I think any kind of forward-looking progressive leader, recognizes why that's counterproductive, to have that kind of an environment. Yet, depending on culture, depending on background, depending on experience, there's a whole slew of ways of how that could actually end up getting manifest in a particular organization, a particular team. And so you got to be really careful, even if like anyone who's in the audience, you're listening, you're like, no, I fully want my team to use this tool and to learn how to use it effectively. I want them to. I don't think they're cheating when they use it. In fact, it's a tool they should be using. You may agree with all of that, but your team members still may be worried about, being treated as though they're cheating or being looked down on for how they utilize it or something like that. Like we're just in a really kind of no man's land, kind of wild, wild west space, right? And so you really have to be clear and consistent with your communication, your messaging, and the sharing of those expectations and the accountability piece. Like
Yeah.
really, really explicit and be repetitive. Like you gotta over and over and over again help people really understand where you're coming from, because it's a real fear for a lot of people. This is a little different, but I have two college age daughters, and both of them, are constantly hearing from professors about not cheating, with AI. And I'm a professor, like I approach it very differently. I approach it, assuming my students are using AI, how am I going to integrate it into the course and into the assignments and increase expectations and accountability and transparency around AI use. But not all students are getting that right. And so like my daughters, I hear constantly about how they're really worried about, being accused of cheating with AI. And so that is not just going to stop once they graduate and get into the workforce. And I keep on telling them, no, 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 you got
Yeah.
to use it. Even, if a particular professor, says, don't you dare. Okay, but like if you're going to be successful in the workforce, you got to figure this stuff out and learn how to use it, and and then go and leverage it once you're in the workforce.
Yeah.
And but I think a lot of students are getting that. And so there's this young generation of workers that are getting constant mixed messaging around usage and what's appropriate and what's not. And again, you as a manager, even if you fully buy into all this, you cannot assume that your people are just going to all of a sudden be comfortable using AI to enhance and support the work that they're doing. It's a challenging
Right.
time, because it's just shifting so rapidly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been interesting to connect with, leaders from higher ed organizations as well in that challenge of, students and how do you encourage usage and still ensure they're learning the skills that they need? And you made a good point, right? When they move into the workforce, If using AI is going to be an expectation, it's important to prepare them for that.
Yeah.
So how do you do that and then get clear on, where the guidelines are and how to measure, growth and success and learning?
Yeah, yeah. Trust is a big issue. It came out, in spades in the report. Of course, we know trust in any organization is foundational. Talk a little bit more about trust and how it specifically relates to AI use, and the role of this super manager.
Absolutely. So trust is foundational, and this is, one of our favorite topics as it relates to employee experience. What we found in our research is it's the number one element that's tied back to, higher performing organizations. What is important about trust right now? Well, there's so much change happening and so much uncertainty, and a lot of discussions around, how AI is going to be impacting jobs. Edelman's trust barometer from earlier this year, showed that trust has fallen, and, not just trust in the workplace, but trust in establishments. So it's a challenge that, leaders are going to have to navigate. What are some of the ways to build trust? Communication is key. We talked a bit about that, and communication, listening, and action. And I would say with action, is integrity, right? So communication, how can we be more and over communicate, more transparent and over communicate about AI? How is it being used? How do we expect employees to use it? If performance evaluations are changing based on AI use, how can we be so clear about that with employees? What data is being collected? I know, there's concerns around trust around data, and all of how it's impacting employees. And of course, at an organizational and leadership level, some of this is going to happen there. But on a team level, what does it mean? How do you translate that into context for the specific function? How is it impacting their job? What level of freedom and empowerment sits with the team and with the line manager? And then making those decisions and communicating that over and over again. On the other side of that is listening and an open dialogue, right? So we can't just communicate and then shut down. Listening to employees' concerns, understanding, why is utilization not happening, or, where's that fear coming from around experimentation and sharing learnings, really understanding what are the barriers, and also listening for those positive experiences too, because that's how you capture the innovation. And then, of course, taking action based on what you hear, right? We know that listening is only effective if you actually communicate back and really take action to support employees. So there's a lot to be done around trust. I think, it's a huge and growing topic around this. And again, it's not something, as you know, that's built in one big gesture. It's a continuous conversation, communicating, building trust over and over again.
Yeah, it really just takes genuine intention and consistency, right, over
Yeah.
time, to develop it. And it's hard to develop and create and maintain and sustain trust. It's really easy to erode it.
Yes.
And so, nobody's perfect. Like, nobody expects you to be perfect. And I do think most people are willing to give leaders the benefit of the doubt, a lot of the time. They don't expect perfection, but they do expect intentionality. They do expect you to be genuine, and they do expect you to make the effort and to acknowledge, to be real and to acknowledge when there's a misstep, and what you're going to do about it, right? And all of, that applies to any kind of trust situation, but certainly in this kind of a fraught, kind of wild, wild west environment of new technology implementation and usage, I think it's even more so. Like, you just really,
Yeah.
it's like you almost can't over communicate. And it's almost like any amount of communication that you think is necessary, double that and then double it again, because
Right.
it's just going to be so important. And you just really have to be genuine with your people, all along the way. And we've all been in situations where it's performative and where, it's not real, and you can tell, like, you just really can tell, and that will only erode trust, even though you think you're doing the things that are going to create trust, right?
Yeah. And you reminded me of, another thing, which is humility, right? Because this is new for everyone, and managers are employees too. And there's a lot of uncertainty. And, managers have bared a lot of burden around this. So, I mean, we've seen engagement decline this year, more so by managers, according to Gallup's research. And so they're also experiencing this at the same time. And I think the more authentic leaders and managers can be, that they don't know all the answers, then that's also going to create an environment of psychological safety as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know at the time I'm going to have to let you go here in a minute, but as we wrap up, please share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, the team there at the Josh Bersin Company, where they can find the report, and then maybe one takeaway for anyone listening on how they can, start tomorrow to help build super managers within their organization.
Sure. Well, so if you're interested in reading the full research report, you can find it at joshbersin.com/supermanager. So that's where the report is. It's available for anyone to download. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect. We're always looking for organizations, leaders to talk to. If you're rethinking your management model around, AI transformation, we'd love to hear from you. Would love to connect. And then one takeaway. I mean, I think it really does come back to revisiting your leadership and management framework model. What are those characteristics of leaders that matter most at your organization? And is that the right model for the age of AI? Are there things that need to be changed? And then, we kind of define a super manager, we give some characteristics, but thinking about what does that mean in the context of your organization? Every organization has different priorities and goals, and it's really important to put this into context for you.
I love it. Thank you so much, Julia. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Julia and her team there at the Josh Bersin Company can do for you. Check out the report. And I hope everyone can create these safe and inclusive environments where everyone can become super workers. We have super managers to support them. As always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.